What's going on, everybody? C4, welcome back to more C4, where today we're continuing our 2023 NFL Draft Series as it relates to my beloved Philadelphia Eagles, where we go through every single positional group and we talk about some draft prospects in relation to the Philadelphia Eagles pick that I would like to see as members of the Philadelphia Eagles. And today we're looking at the linebacker group. We're kind of encompassing all of the linebackers, the Will, the Mike, and the Sam linebacker. Maybe not so much the Sam, because we did talk about some edge rushers that could play as depth behind Hassan Reddick. And I will quickly mention a couple players that I think will operate in that role. But ultimately in this video, I more so want to focus on an area that honestly is a position of concern, I think, for the Philadelphia Eagles. We lost our two starting linebackers last year in Kaiser White and TJ Edwards. And we're all just making the assumption, and it's not a wild assumption. I think we're pretty optimistic that Nakobe Dean, our third-round pick in 2022, a player that some people thought could have went in the first round. I personally thought he'd probably go in the second round. Still was there in the third round. Hell of a player, hell of a career at Georgia. Maybe the question could be asked, if Nakobe Dean was in this year's draft class, where would he go? Would he be considered the top linebacker? Would he go a little bit earlier? Would he go a little bit? I don't know. But what I am here to say is that we don't know for sure if he's going to be great at the NFL. We're going to assume that he is. But if he's not, we got Nicholas Morrow, who came over from the Chicago Bears, spent some time with Sean Desai in Chicago, so he's familiar with the scheme. You got Christian Ellis, who's a special teamer. Davion Taylor's, unless there's some miraculous development under Sean Desai, likely special teamer, if not doesn't make the roster. Sean Bradley has been predominantly a special teamer. And, hell, even if we are going to throw in this Sam linebacker, behind Hassan Reddick is Patrick Johnson and Kyron Johnson. At least Kyron Johnson's a ridiculous athlete, but still, all developmental players lack of depth. It's an interesting position because it's a position we know the Philadelphia Eagles don't value. We know Harry Roseman doesn't value it. So it's always tough to try to pinpoint what we're going to do with linebackers. So I'm going to help you guys with that. I'm going to break down some of my top linebackers I think could fit for the Philadelphia Eagles. And there's only really one assumption that we're going to be a little bit fluid with as we break down these linebackers is I don't know if Nakobe Dean is going to be our Mike. He can be our Mike, or he could be our Will linebacker. I had kind of always penciled him in as the Will linebacker. I always thought Nakobe Dean would be our replacement for Kaiser White, and we'd have to find someone that can, I don't necessarily say, Nakobe Dean's probably going to be the guy that wears the speaker in his helmet, helps call the plays, I assume. But, we need maybe a more traditional middle linebacker, a little bit bigger, a little bit more stout against the run, even though that is a strength of Nakobe Dean's game. So let's talk about some of the linebackers in this year's draft class. And we'll just use the background of the RAS score. First up is Jack Campbell, who is my top linebacker in the draft. Maybe a little bit of a hot take. Some people have him, in the top 3, but maybe closer to 3 than they do 1. But for me and my money, at 6'4", 249 pounds, testing 9.98 RAS. He is the Dick Butkus Award winner, which goes to the best linebacker in college football from last season. 128 tackles, 5.5 TFLs, 3 pass breakups, 2 interceptions. Kind of a do-it-all linebacker. And usually when you get these old school, he's built like an old school linebacker. 6'4.5", 250. But when you get one of these guys that runs a 4.65, which is a fine time. I'm not going to say it's a great time, but it's a fine time for a bigger linebacker. But he, usually with these guys, you might get, good straight line speed. You might get decent explosion, but usually the big, lanky, bulky linebackers get exposed in the agility drills. They're stiff. They're not able. These are outstanding times. I do think he's easily, in my opinion, if you are looking for just a pure off-ball linebacker, Jack Campbell is the best one in this year's draft class. And honestly, we get into the second round, if he's still available when the Philadelphia Eagles have their pick in the second round, he's probably going to be near top of my board because I think he's plug and play. I think he's pro-ready. I think he has a very high ceiling. And again, it goes down to what are the odds? Howie Roseman gets Bijan Robinson in the running back in the first round, and then uses one of our higher day 2 picks go linebacker. 2 positions that he always undervalues. But Jack Campbell is a special player. And I just think not enough is being made about our linebacking room right now. I don't think it's hit the red button and panic because we have a prospect in Nakobe Dean who, honestly, some people thought might have even started last year. But you need more than just one guy. You need more than one guy that's going to be able to run the middle of the field and cover. Because that's not going to, even though Hassan Reddick is a linebacker, he's not a linebacker. Right now, our starting linebackers are Nicholas Morrow and Nakobe Dean. Someone like Jack Campbell, I think he walks. I think he walks in. He'll be the Mike linebacker. You have Nakobe Dean at will. I'm very interested in Jack Campbell come the second round. He's probably going to be one of my favorite picks in the second round, depending on the board that's available. It's very likely. Another linebacker that I really like is Trenton Simpson. Now, I didn't really love his tape. I was more impressed, honestly, with Jeremiah Trotter's kid, and there's another linebacker there, Clemson, that's really talented. They're going to be, fairly high picks, but they're not. I don't think they're athletically the same as Trenton Simpson. 6'2", 235 pounds, good bench, elite speed, great agility, great explosive. He just tests and showed that he is a very good athlete. Now, could be off ball. He literally played everything. He was like kind of utilized how Micah Parsons is utilized for the Dallas Cowboys in terms of where they line him up. Micah Parsons would be edge rusher. He'd come off the edge. He'd blitz. They put him in middle linebacker. He'd go sideline to sideline. He'd drop back into coverage against tight ends and running backs. And that's like kind of how Trenton Simpson, in 2021, 2 years ago, he used a little bit more of a pass rusher. He had 12 tackles for loss, 6 sacks. Last year, 4 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks. But a transitionary period for the Clemson defense. He's an underrated guy. I think you see a lot of overcommitting. I think you see maybe missed tackles to a certain degree. But what I see here is I would draft him and I would put him behind. I would classify him not necessarily an edge rusher, but I would put him in that Sam. He would be the backup, the rotational piece to Hassan Reddick. I would equate how I would view Trenton Simpson on this defense to how Nolan Smith would be utilized on this defense. And I honestly would say if you're not getting Nolan Smith, and that's a popular name for the Philadelphia Eagles, potentially at 10, maybe at 30. If you're not getting Nolan Smith, I almost would say the next best thing, if you want that style of weapon for our defense, would be Trenton Simpson. Raw player, but again, we have this sense of optimism that Sean Desai, our new defensive coordinator, is a player developer. And he'll be able to take just a ridiculous athlete like this and mold him into, honestly, a hybrid type player. A guy that would be able to rotate in for Hassan Reddick and rush the quarterback with this athletic ability. A guy that would be able to be a thumper, a guy that would be able to hopefully develop a little bit of his coverage skills. So I'm very, very interested in Trenton Simpson. Likely would cost a second-round pick. Some people think he might sneak into the first round, but he's a guy that I don't think is getting talked about enough in terms of what he could bring to the Philadelphia Eagles defense. I think he has a great skill set for our defense. Might not be the best fit everywhere. Might not be the best fit if you don't have a creative defensive coordinator. But I think Trenton Simpson, he'd have an absolute role here on the Philadelphia Eagles. So if we're going second round, those are kind of the big two. Trenton Simpson, if we want kind of a hybrid. Jack Campbell, if we want a starter that can play alongside Nakobe Dean. Last of kind of the big name linebackers, I'm not just going through like literally the top 10 players. Drew Sanders. I'm just going to mention this quickly because I think for the Philadelphia Eagles, there's a change. Like he's a hybrid. I believe I actually talked about him in the edge rusher video, but just because he also kind of overlaps as a linebacker. No one really knows. He was an athlete, recruited as a 5-star athlete. And it's just, is he going to be a pass rusher? Is he going to be an off-ball linebacker? I think if you draft Drew Sanders, ideally, the Eagles, if they're making that investment, he's going to be viewed as more of a pass rusher to play the Sam role. But if they think he can be off-ball, he's an interesting name. Kind of a lesser version of Trenton Simpson in terms of explosive plays, explosive attributes. But he's pretty damn good. 103 tackles, 13.5 TFLs, 9.5 sacks, 3 forced fumbles, 6 PBUs. Last year at Arkansas was ridiculous. First team SEC, unanimous All-American, but little bit more of a niche. I think when you have someone like Trenton Simpson, who's just a ridiculous athlete, S-tier athlete, you can do a little bit more things, have a little bit more leeway to get creative. But I definitely think Drew Sanders is in that bubble and would be someone that, again, it's very unlikely that we even address the linebacker in the second round, but I wouldn't hate it. So moving on, we got a couple linebackers that I think, if we're going with Nakobe Dean at the mic, these are some guys that can play the will linebacker spot. First, we have Deion Henley from Washington State, very productive. One point was a wide receiver at Nevada, transferred eventually to Washington State. Last season at Washington State, 106 tackles, 12 TFLs, 4 sacks, 3 forced fumbles, 2 PBUs, and interception. Just ridiculous production. Still learning the position, so a little bit raw. Right now he's projected to go around the third round. But as you can see, very solid athlete. And I think could come in and compete for the will linebacker spot with Nicholas Morrow. And maybe gives us a little bit juice, a little bit more upside at that position. So one guy that, at least in terms of what style of linebacker Philadelphia is looking for, here's a nice guy that could be available in the third round. I think within that bubble too, Dorian Williams from Tulane is another guy that is worth mentioning. Small school player, big time production. In 2020 is when I kind of started to pay attention to because he had 16.5 tackles for loss, I was like, oh, shit, this guy just lives in the line, beyond the line of scrimmage. And then 2022, 131 tackles, 8.5 TFLs, 5 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, 2 picks, 9 PBUs, was first team All-ACC. And I think you get a guy that just, maybe a limited ceiling, maybe not a ridiculously high ceiling, not a ridiculous athlete, but definitely a good athlete, and would fit that he'd play well. He'd be the will linebacker. Maybe a little bit more affordable as well as Deion Henley's going 3rd round, 4th round, somewhere in that range. Dorian Williams, you might be getting 4th round into the 5th round. So he could be one of those linebackers that just sits there a little bit. And if he creeps into day 3, I already can tell you right now, I'm going to be screaming on Twitter, go draft this guy, Howie Roseman. Pay attention to the linebacker room. The last of the linebackers that aren't going to be free falling is Yasir Abdullah from Louisville. Another linebacker that I didn't really mention that I think could be interesting for the Philadelphia Eagles is, there's 2. One is Nick Herbig, but I think Nick Herbig, again, could be an off-ball linebacker, but more so in that edge hybrid Sam Hassan-Reddick role. Ivan Pace out of Cincinnati is another interesting one. He's just really undersized, but had S-tier production last year for the Cincinnati Bearcats. 137 tackles, 21.5 TFLs, 10 sacks, 3 forced fumbles, but he's 5'10". So, if we have shown our hand a little bit that we don't really care about size at linebacker, given, Nakobe Dean's shortcomings, someone like Ivan Pace could be another guy considered. But if we're going back into athletes and all-rounder, this is your, if you like what I sold you on Trenton Simpson, but you didn't want to make the investment of a 2nd-round pick, Yasir Abdullah is projected right now to go in the 4th round, maybe potentially slip in the 5th round. As you can see, very good athlete. Maybe doesn't have ideal length, but elite explosion, elite speed, 4.47, almost 240 pounds. The production the last 2 seasons at Louisville, and he's the kind of guy that's a tweener linebacker. I think more so you're going to use him as an off-ball, but you can get a little pass rush out of him, kind of literally how I described Trenton Simpson. But Yasir Abdullah, 2021, 61 tackles, 17.5 tackles for loss, 10 sacks. Last year, 2022, 63 tackles, 14.5 tackles for loss, 9.5 sacks, 4 forced fumbles, 6 PBUs, 2 interceptions. Did a little bit of everything. You give me these productive linebackers that are great athletes, that still have a lot of upside. He's 23 years old, so maybe a little bit, as opposed to some of the 21-year-olds that are in this class. But Yasir Abdullah offers great athleticism, has proven production, multiple seasons, not just a one-year wonder breakout candidate. And I think you could probably put him in that will. You probably want him out the will so you could blitz a little bit, but a blitzing linebacker. Remember back in the day, Jim Johnson? I remember when my Eagles would blitz their linebackers all the fucking time. Something like Yasir Abdullah, a little bit more of an affordable option. And I would say if we are waiting to day 3 for our linebacker, which is very likely, I'm thinking Yasir Abdullah, Dorian Williams are probably my 2 favorite guys earlier on day 3. And lastly, if we're going late into day 3, I had to talk about a Florida Gator. And we got Ventrell Miller. If we're going undersized, there's other linebackers here that are interesting. I don't just want to, Noah Sewell could be a nice developmental guy. Servassier Dennis from Pitt. But again, I didn't want to get too many guys that would require a significant draft pick that are just very similar to Nakobe Dean. You want to try to get a compliment to that, and all those guys generally are built like Nakobe Dean. And maybe that's the same thing for Ventrell Miller, but Ventrell Miller is going to be a guy that's going to be very affordable. We're talking 6th round, maybe even 7th round. But much like when I talked about Gervon Dexter on the Florida Gator defense, Florida Gators defense has been terrible, absolutely terrible for the last 2-3 seasons. But Ventrell Miller has been at least somewhat solid. And I think there's a little bit of a player in there. He's had some, struggles with injuries, but last season at Florida, 74 tackles, 8.5 tackles for loss, 2 forced fumbles, 2 PBUs. I think he's just, if we're thinking about TJ Edwards, when TJ Edwards came to Philadelphia as an undrafted free agent, undersized a little bit, slow, maybe not the fastest, but just kind of like a good football player that grinded his way up from special teams and ended up earning a starting role. And if I'm looking at some of these linebackers that could fill that void, that are going to be likely 7th round, maybe UDFA range, I'm going to throw a little bit of Gator bias in here. Obviously, Howie Roseman, Florida Gator alumni, probably knows a little bit about all these Gators. I think someone like Ventrell Miller would be very interesting. At worst, is a nice special team that can come in and compete with the Ellises, with the Sean Bradleys, with the Davion Taylors, if you will. But I think there might be a good football player there in Ventrell Miller. And I think if we get into UDFA range, he'd be one of the guys that I would highly consider. Kind of a dog for my Gators defense. We all know Nick Sirianni wants some dogs. So there you go, fellas. Those are some linebackers. Not the strongest linebacker class, But there's plenty of guys that I think could fill a role in here with the Philadelphia Eagles. I'd love to hear what you guys think. First of all, outside of all the players, if I miss one, let me know. But do you guys think like linebackers underrated need for the Philadelphia Eagles right now? Or am I just making a mountain out of a molehill and it's not that bad? We should just chill. Morrow's solid, has some production. Nakobe Dean's going to take big step up. He's a breakout candidate for pretty much every Eagle fan on Twitter. I don't know, man. I'm kind of in the middle. We'll see. We'll see how it all breaks down. I mean, maybe you can get Terrell Edmonds into like a weird Isaiah Simmons role as like a nickel back. I don't know, man. It's a weird room. Out of a lot of these rooms, people talk about the running back room. People talk about, potentially, the pass rush outside of our two starters. Like, is it going to be Derek Barnett? Who's going to be the next guy? But I just think linebacker is a really underrated, under-discussed position of need for the Philadelphia Eagles. But if I'm wrong, let me know in the comment section below. But that'll do it for me today, guys. We'll be back tomorrow, finishing up. I'm going to just do the defensive backs in one video. So we're going to talk about corners and the safeties. I'd say if we didn't have James Bradbury and Darius Slay, I'd probably give the corners their own video. But we're running a little bit short on time, so we'll lump in that. And then, there's going to be some good players. I think that's definitely two positions that the Philadelphia Eagles should look at strengthening during the draft. So we'll be back probably around this time tomorrow night, breaking down DBs for the Philadelphia Eagles. And then it is Thursday and time for draft day, where I will be live streaming the first round over on the main channel. Come stop by. Hopefully Howie keeps both first round picks, and we have a lot to talk about during that stream. But until then, it's your boy C4 saying like, subscribe, all that cheesy YouTuber stuff, and I'll see you back in the next one. Peace out.